When did ancient humans first build something? It sounds like the kind of question that should have a clean answer, because building feels so deeply human that we instinctively place it somewhere near the beginning of our own story. Look around you and almost everything is built: the room, the chair, the road outside, the screen in front of you, the shelf holding your books, and the wall holding the shelf. Modern life is matter arranged into deliberate relationships. Remove those relationships one by one: roads, roofs, bridges, furniture, platforms, fences, and the world starts looking less like civilization and more like raw landscape. So it seems natural to imagine that construction began when people like us settled down, made shelters, formed villages, and eventually discovered the ancient human pleasure of complaining about building regulations. The tidy version usually goes something like this: primitive ancestor, stone tool, fire, hut, village, city. Construction arrives once Homo sapiens is already on stage and begins making the world more permanent. Archaeology keeps ruining tidy upgrade trees, however, and in 2019, a discovery at Kalambo Falls in Zambia forced a stranger possibility. What if the habit of reshaping space, of taking separate pieces of the environment and making them work together, began long before houses, long before agriculture, and even before our own species appears clearly in the fossil record? That is the real problem behind the title, "When Did Ancient Humans First Build Something?" At Kalambo Falls, archaeologists recovered several modified wooden objects from sediments associated with the river. Among the oldest material, below river level, they encountered an arrangement that looked almost absurdly ordinary: one large piece of timber lying across another. Two pieces of wood touching are not automatically a construction. Trees fall against trees all the time, and if that were enough to qualify as architecture, every forest would be a megacity. What made Kalambo different was the point where the pieces met. The upper timber was not simply resting on the lower one. It had been changed. At the crossing point, the upper timber contained a large transverse notch, while the lower piece also showed signs of working. Researchers identified groups of marks consistent with scraping and shaping, alongside evidence associated with chopping, scraping, and adzing. The interpretation was not that somebody had casually cut a branch, but that one irregular piece of wood had been deliberately reshaped so it could fit against another. That is a subtle distinction, but it changes the technological problem completely. A sharpened stick can be useful by itself. A joint only works because one component has been modified in relation to a second component. Imagine holding two crooked logs with no socket, screw hole, standardized connector, or IKEA diagram. To make them fit, you must remove material from one, according to where the other will eventually sit. The notch is therefore not correct in isolation. It is correct relative to another object. In mechanical terms, the shape of one component is being constrained by a relationship that only becomes complete when the pieces meet. This does not prove language, mathematics, or some conveniently measurable prehistoric IQ score. It does, however, show a practical ability to transform separate natural materials so that they function together. But how do we know? A river is not a museum curator. It moves wood, scrapes surfaces, carries sediment, and damages whatever sits in its path. So a convincing case cannot depend on one suspicious mark that happens to look human. The Kalambo study considered the position of the timbers, the surface modifications, the sedimentary context, and detailed models of the worked areas, while experimental woodworking helped compare traces made with stone tools against damage that flowing water and abrasive sediment could produce. The evidence had to survive the possibility that nature had simply bullied a fallen tree into looking archaeological. Taken together, the geometry, marks, and context supported deliberate modification and joining. That establishes the first half of the mystery. Somebody appears to have made the joint. The second half is the age. Ordinary radiocarbon dating cannot simply be stretched to 500,000 years, so the researchers used luminescence techniques on sediments associated with the finds. Very roughly, mineral grains can accumulate trapped energy after burial. When stimulated in the laboratory, the stored signal can help estimate how long it has been since the relevant clock was reset. 16 sediment samples were analyzed from the sequence, and the oldest cluster associated with the structural timber produced an age of approximately 476,000 years, with an uncertainty of about 23,000 years. That number changes the entire framing. The construction is substantially older than the roughly 315,000-year-old material from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco that documents an early evolutionary stage of the Homo sapiens clade. So when did ancient humans first build something? We still cannot answer first, but Kalambo pushes secure structural woodworking astonishingly deep into the past, to a period before the earliest currently known fossil evidence assigned to our own species. So who built it? We do not know. There was no convenient fossil lying beside the timber with an employee badge reading Homo heidelbergensis, senior decking engineer, and assigning the structure to a specific species would go beyond the evidence. That uncertainty is important, because behavior does not wait politely for taxonomy. Prehistory was not organized like a museum, in which each hominin species remained inside a labeled drawer, using only the technologies later assigned to it. Whoever the Kalambo builders were, they had access to stone-cutting tools, timber, water, and practical problems, and the wood tells us something they could do, even though no skull at the site tells us exactly what to call them. The phrase ancient humans can also mislead us here if we hear it as shorthand for ancient Homo sapiens. In archaeology, the deeper story belongs to a wider human lineage, populated by different hominin groups whose boundaries and relationships are reconstructed from incomplete fossils and artifacts. Kalambo matters because the behavior is clearer than the biological identity. We can describe what the surviving wood was made to do without pretending we know exactly which branch of the family tree held the tool. This also changes the emotional center of the discovery. The surprise is not that some named species turned out to be smarter than expected, because that would reduce the evidence to a competition between labels. The more interesting point is that a behavior we tend to associate with our own technological identity appears outside the neat boundary of our species. The archaeological record is showing us capability before it gives us identity, which is often how deep prehistory works. First you find the action, and only later, if ever, you learn who performed it. What was it? Here the evidence becomes frustrating again. Only a fragment survived, so we do not have walls, a roof, a floor plan, or anything resembling a prehistoric property listing. The researchers discussed possibilities suited to a periodically wet environment, including a raised platform, a walkway, or some kind of foundation associated with a working or living surface. Any of those would make practical sense, but none can be treated as a recovered blueprint. We do not know whether people crossed it, worked on it, built above it, or used it for some purpose no modern reconstruction has guessed correctly. That uncertainty does not weaken the central claim, because the evidence does not require us to know the final function. What matters is the relationship between the surviving timbers. Large pieces of wood were deliberately shaped so they could form a structural arrangement. In other words, Kalambo gives us evidence of construction without giving us a complete building. That distinction is essential, because the framing, when did ancient humans first build something, becomes misleading the moment we quietly turn structural woodworking into the first house. The site is remarkable precisely because we can say something strong without saying more than the evidence allows. Was it really the first? Almost certainly. That is the wrong question if first means the literal first construction ever made. The archaeological record is not a complete recording of ancient behavior. It is a survival contest. Wood, bark, reeds, fibers, and hides usually lose that contest, while stone has the unfair advantage of remaining in the ground for immense periods of time. This is where preservation bias finally becomes central to the story, because the oldest surviving structure is not automatically the first structure that ever existed. Our record of deep technology is therefore a filtered record. Stone tools survive in enormous numbers, while many of the organic things those tools may have helped produce simply disappear. Put differently, stone has administrator privileges. If an ancient hominin used a stone edge to shape a wooden handle, the stone might survive while the handle vanishes. If the same tool helped make a platform, a frame, or a shelter, the organic structure could disappear as well. Hundreds of actions can be deleted, while one stubborn piece of stone remains behind, and after enough time that survivor can start looking like the whole technological system. Kalambo survived because part of the site remained waterlogged, creating exceptional conditions for preserving wood. That does not mean every ancient landscape contains similar structures. It means that our ability to see them depends partly on geology. A structure can exist, be useful, and completely vanish. An archaeological absence can therefore mean several different things. Nobody made the object, nobody has found it yet, or it was made from material that had almost no chance of surviving. The deeper we go into time, the harder those possibilities are to separate. This is why the supporting evidence has to stay in supporting roles. There is older evidence for deliberate woodworking. The Kalambo study notes modified wooden material from Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, dating to more than 780,000 years ago. That tells us woodworking itself is older, but a modified wooden object is not automatically a construction. At Olduvai Gorge, a roughly circular arrangement of stones at the DK locality has historically been interpreted as the possible base of a shelter or windbreak, which, if completely secure, would push construction much farther back. Yet it does not provide the same direct structural relationship as two preserved timbers modified to fit one another. Much later, at Bruniquel Cave in southwestern France, large ring-like constructions, made from deliberately broken stalagmites, were dated to roughly 176,000 years ago. Their geometry, arrangement, and associated traces support a human-made origin during the Neanderthal period, although their precise purpose remains uncertain. Gesher, Olduvai, and Bruniquel do not replace Kalambo as the spine of this story. They serve a narrower purpose. They remind us that woodworking, possible construction, and deliberate spatial organization appear in different forms across a much deeper hominin past than the old Homo sapiens builds, everyone before us merely survives story would suggest. The evidence ladder is therefore more useful than a race for a single trophy. Woodworking is not automatically construction. A modified object is not automatically a structure. A structural joint is not automatically a complete building. A possible structure is not automatically secure evidence. And the oldest secure evidence is not automatically the first event in history. Once those categories stay separate, Kalambo becomes more impressive rather than less, because it does not need to be promoted into something it is not. Now return to the notch. Its significance is easy to miss, because a notch is visually modest, but mechanically, it represents a shift from changing an object to organizing a relationship. Remove too little wood, and the pieces do not fit. Remove it in the wrong place, and the relationship fails. One component is being shaped according to another component that is not yet fully assembled. That does not let us reconstruct the builder's inner thoughts, but it does show directed material transformation for combination, which is different from merely making a cutting edge or sharpening a point. Once technology involves components working together, the environment becomes available for a different kind of manipulation. A tree can become material rather than simply a tree, while a wet surface can become something to cross, rise above, or reorganize. Kalambo did not invent every composite technology that came later, and there is no straight evolutionary line from two timbers to bridges and cities, but the underlying principle is recognizable. Construction begins at the point where the default arrangement of the environment is no longer treated as final. That brings us back to the framing question: when did ancient humans first build something? The scientifically careful answer is that we do not know. The actual beginning may be older than anything that survived, and future discoveries may move the boundary again. What we can say is that Kalambo Falls provides strong published evidence that hominins were deliberately shaping large timbers and joining them structurally about 476,000 years ago. We do not know the species of the builder, we do not know the complete form of the construction, and we do not know its precise purpose. Those unknowns are not failures in the story. They are the edge of what the evidence can currently support, and that edge is where the larger reversal begins. When most of us imagine deep prehistory, we imagine stone, hand axes, flakes, cores, and lithic industries. That picture is not wrong, because stone is genuinely abundant in the surviving record. The mistake comes when survival starts masquerading as importance, and we unconsciously assume that what survived in the greatest quantity must also have dominated what ancient hominins made, touched, and depended on in everyday life. Imagine distant archaeologists reconstructing our civilization after books, cables, textiles, timber, plastics, and electronics had vanished, while ceramic bathroom fixtures happened to preserve magnificently. They might build an impressively rigorous chronology of the ceramic toilet age. Their catalog could be accurate, their measurements could be excellent, their entire picture of daily life could still be ridiculous. Preservation would not have lied to them. It would simply have shown them a radically uneven sample. The Stone Age works differently, of course, but the warning is useful. The term itself is not wrong. It is an archaeological framework built around extraordinarily durable evidence. Yet Kalambo reminds us that the technological world surrounding ancient hominins may have contained far more organic material than the surviving record can reveal. We should not invent missing platforms, containers, handles, or structures simply because they are possible, but we should also resist treating their absence as proof that the world was technologically empty. That is why the two timbers matter beyond their age. They are not a complete catalog of an ancient wood age, and they do not justify imagining a lost civilization of carpenters. They are something more disciplined and, in a way, more unsettling. Proof that at least one category of complex organic technology can vanish almost entirely, and then reappear only when preservation becomes extraordinary. Kalambo does not show us the missing world. It shows us that there is a missing part of the record. Somewhere roughly 476,000 years ago, beside a river in what is now Zambia, a hominin looked at timber and saw something whose natural shape did not have to remain its final shape. It could be cut, fitted, and combined into a deliberate arrangement. We do not know that individual's name, species, or intention, and they could never have imagined that hundreds of thousands of years later, another group of primates would excavate two damp pieces of wood and use them to reconsider the history of technology. Almost everything else from that moment may have disappeared, but the relationship between those two pieces survived. So when did ancient humans first build something? Earlier than we can securely see, almost certainly. At least 476,000 years ago, if we are asking for clear surviving structural woodworking. The oldest structure we know is therefore not a timestamp for the invention of building. It is a surviving checkpoint in a much older, badly erased story. And perhaps that is the real lesson hidden at Kalambo. The Stone Age may be what remains when wood forgets and stone remembers. If you enjoy the places where one strange piece of evidence quietly breaks our picture of human history, subscribe to Oddplain, because there are still plenty of broken pictures left to investigate.